Ladies and gentlemen of the crypto space, we're live on a Wednesday, July 28th at 11:42 a.m. And I'm scrolling to find a tweet that I want to start with, which is pretty cool. Today's stream is going to tie in a lot about the Senate Banking Committee, that a lot of the verbiage and rhetoric that we heard yesterday from our elected representatives. Now, that's a good representation of what the vast majority of representatives, in particular in this case senators, think. We have to draw, sentiment away from the tone of their commentary, not just the content of their commentary. And it was very meaningful and transparent yesterday in how a lot of people think. We see senators that are generally supportive and on our side, and then we see senators that are not supportive and they're defensive, and they feel like the legacy system is what is being defended, which is obviously neglecting the sentiment of all the persons that participate in what's become a very large community, and that's the emotional response when you feel like not being attacked, but you're not being supported, and they're just not favorable opinions of the activities you're engaging with, and that's a disappointment, and it's angering in many regards. So that's a lot of emotions come out of really watching and digesting what they talked about yesterday, and seeing which representatives want to help you be successful, and what representatives want to see you be on the wrong side of policy decisions, which would, in theory, it's harmful. Uh, uh, the defensive tone of certain politicians yesterday causes harm to the platforms and protocols that we interact with. And if it causes harm to the platforms and protocols, and we're involved with the platforms and protocols, it's doing harm to us. And, I don't think many humans, let alone senators, are critical of that reality. And I did a tweet yesterday. I added Hester Pierce, and I think that's meaningful. I talked a lot yesterday about investor protections, and why are investor protections always from the legacy finance perspective? How do we protect the legacy financial system? And I'm like, no. We have a system that we interact with that generates revenue, that is important and a critical component to our livelihoods and our future, and how we express our choice of payment vehicle and savings vehicle, and we're neglected because we need investor protections. How do we protect the crypto financial system from being affected negatively by the legacy financial system? It's all relative, and that's important. And I feel that that's glanced over by especially by a lot of the politicians yesterday, and it's glanced over. We know it's glanced over and marginalized, maybe trivialized by the tone that they used in a lot of their rhetoric, and it's very frustrating. It's a big world, and there's a lot of politicians in many countries, and I don't think representative republics, or whatever the various countries define their government structure as, represent everyone. They can't represent everyone, and that's what's another interesting manifestation of the DeFi space is DAOs, where I have my identity, I have my address, and I can represent myself. So whether a particular policy change is enacted that's for or against my ideology, at least I was able to express my ideology. Whereas once a politician is in office and they're a representative of a community, it's their ideology. So, and that's just very disappointing, because anyone that plays with DAOs in the crypto space has a capacity to represent themselves. So when you see a politician, a representative style politician, representing really their own opinions and ideologies, there's a massive disconnect between, the way we feel as if we're actually being represented or not. And I feel like my politicians don't represent me. I don't really see there's a couple. I don't really see the majority, certainly the majority, but at least a large handful, a large number of politicians representing me and who I am and my interest and my ideology. So I feel neglected with regard to representation. Thank you, politicians. Just represent, yo. Government of the reps rather than of the people. So that's really what it is. It's a government of representatives, and they're representing their own opinions. Their self-interest gets involved, and it gets all murky. I just want a website where I can vote on shit. Come on, Congress. Doesn't that make sense? Today's episode is sponsored by Change Angel, the non-custodial swap exchange for social goods. Stop depositing on exchanges, not your keys, not your crypto, non-custodial DeFi, or nothing at all. Bam! Let's pop it over to the main screen and see who's in the stream. Igor's in the house. Helsinki, London, Scotland. I love this shit, man. It's a small world, and we're all brothers and sisters, and it's so segregated by country and political organization. It's so frustrating. It's so frustrating. You would think that as humans we could represent ourselves in some sort of globally organized structure and organization. And that's just, we're so far away from that. You know, it's all broken down hierarchically by borders, and that's so frustrating. Mark's in the house, the DAO, talking about the DAO, yes. Okay, so, a good part of the way government is approaching the crypto space is from stablecoins because that's all they could think of. That's all they understand is the dollar and protection of the dollar, this incredibly important hegemony that they have where the dollar rules everything, and that means everything to them. And I can't stand that word, hegemony. Why can't everyone represent themselves or express themselves how they want to express payments? And one of the questions yesterday was like, one of the senators was talking about a bill for freedom of payments where people are guaranteed the right to pay in cash. I'm like, no, how about you invest in an education program so you get people that know that there's a world that has nothing to do with their dollar, and they have options and choices that are more meaningful. Like, holding dollars kind of fucks everyone. Whereas if they were educated that they're fucking themselves by using dollars, that there's maybe another way of making payments, that they're being less fucked. That was a lot of fucks in a couple of sentences. So, that's what I would think is interesting. They talked about the unbanked, like a good portion of America and clearly the rest of the world. But if, double-digit percent of people in America are unbanked or underbanked, and they're like, we have to preserve the right to pay in cash. No, you have to institute education so people can know that there's other better ways of doing things that don't screw them in the end. People are literally getting screwed by getting a paycheck at the end of the week and putting in a bank account. That's what the system has reduced to. And that's personally infuriating. Now, there's a lot of places to get education, clearly myself, and a plethora of sources. Heresy Financial is brilliant, and that's what I have up on the screen, basically. So you follow him on YouTube. His mind is, he articulates and expresses thoughts and ideology very well. This was a great story that he told about stablecoins as a Trojan horse for CBDCs, but all of his content, he's extremely well spoken, and that is, from a person such as myself, quite appreciated. So that's the perspective that government can only think of, is the dollar and hegemony and preserving the dollar as some magical, mystical piece of shit that everyone somehow believes from birth is meaningful, and nobody has a vision of a world outside of a 19th century piece of paper that every schmuck in the world will accept as payment. Like, come on. Come on. Doesn't anyone have any free will? Isn't there any free thinking or critical thinking? I mean, clearly there's a lot on the individual level, but on the average societal level, there's such an absence of critical thinking and like thinking outside the box. Like, think differently. You don't have to conform. You don't have to do what everyone else is doing. You don't have to get a mortgage and screw yourself for 30 years. You don't have to put your dollars in a bank account where you're losing 5, 10, 15, 20% on a yearly basis. You just work your butt off for a week. You just spend 40 hours working. And next year, 20% of that money that you just worked for go bye-bye if you tried to save it. So savers are penalized by retaining their value in dollar denomination. You'd think the government would have an obligation to educate its citizens how they could unscrew themselves. Okay, that was a lot of emotion. Encoder, Portugal in the house. I love it. I love this planet. I love all you guys in every country, and we all have our different problems, and but it's real how they're all comparable or analogous. We're all doing with the same thing, but in our respective countries, we're dealing with them in with different metrics or different proportions. Like inflation is different in every country, and it's interesting to think in the U.S. I'm like, we got to get out of the dollar. Meanwhile, in every other country around the world, is we got to abandon our local fiat, and it's better to be in the dollar than our local fiat. So outside the U.S. is a very different perspective than inside the U.S. I mean, the dollar is the last bag that nobody in the U.S. wants to hold, but the dollar is the the best of the worst bags that anyone wants to hold. I would rather hold the dollar than local fiat, or and because it's just a hot mess. And relativity, just as Einstein talked about, is applicable to all these phenomena. And he really hit the nail on the head about more than just physics, because I'm obviously going off on a tangent here, but everything is relative is such a profound and deep statement. Very difficult to process at times. Alex, you the man, 3 by 3. Yeah, a little bit. Just briefly, you mentioned it. So this is it's hyperinflationary. So logically speaking, there's many ways it can unfold. Um, Meaning you should expect heavy dilution and debasement. I mean, a natural protocol designed like this should be expected for the price to implode, and and the um, and the yield should keep your overall value uh, equal or increasing, and that's the goal. So now, depending on integrations and partnerships and the rate of consumption of the protocol, will determine if there's a net, how extensive the net increase in circulating supply is. Like if there's if the incentive is overwhelmingly meaningful and it plays out as such, more may be locked than released back into circulation, which has a price depreciative effect. So, where's the equilibrium? That's the whole question. You know, we, the price could significantly increase from here, and it's just what ultimately what protocols in the DeFi space are, or at least protocols like this, are quite fascinating from a monetary policy standpoint. We don't know how it's going to play out. It's an experiment, and this could go up 100 times on the money, and the APYs could settle around 150%, and the vast majority of participants can choose to lock their assets, which means you don't have a massive increase in circulating supply. And maybe the vast majority of participants are happy with 100% or 50% or 20% yield. And in that case, the price could actually go up significantly. Um, and this is meaningful. We don't. This is new. Prior to 2020, the only people that played around with monetary policy were sovereign countries and maybe the gaming industry. But now DeFi has shown us that experimentation could occur at a very much larger scale than really gaming ever touched, and dealing with assets in a form that gaming could never touch with regard to interoperability across networks. Previously gaming currencies were inside of that ecosystem alone, but you could take an ohm and move it around in many different protocols. And look, obviously, you have Frax partnering. You have Rary integration for debt positions. I mean, literally, that's a big thing. You could lock your ohm into SOM and you could take debt on it. That's really interesting. So, historically, you guys know my opinion of high APY protocols. Um, and that all of that really still holds true, particularly with regard to the basing effects of the increase in circulating supply. But I see with this protocol some interesting supply constraining pressures, especially the fact that SOM can be collateralized and debt can be taken on it. That's quite interesting. Um, you don't see that a lot. I mean, obviously, Curve has a variation of that. It's a decaying hyperinflationary. The yield is derived from transaction fees, where the yield here is derived from a lot from bonds. So the bond yield is actually quite nice, 6.65 and 2%. That's meaningful. Come on, that's huge. And on DAI, 5.66% on dollars. That's crazy. That's a massive, massive number compared to 10-year treasuries. Come on. So, how it plays out always will only ever be known in hindsight. So, I felt, look, I got 9.65 ohm, and I'm like, all right, cool, let's see what happens. In 4 hours, I'll have 9.7 ohm, 9.75, or it's pretty nice, 7% on a 5-day basis. Um, the most important thing, um, I believe, ideologically, is you can't dismiss things. You have to understand them and then do a proper digestion of the information. And then and only then can you either be accepting or dismissive. So, the vast majority of protocols that have high emissions, look what happened with Binance Smart Chain. The vast majority of shit is absolute garbage. And, another thing you look for always is partnerships. And you guys know my opinion of Frax. Frax actually, I have a large position in Frax. Right now, I have a lot of cash because the cash is Frax USDC LP. Come on, I put 35 grand in there. That's wonderful. I mean, this is like 50% yield. One of them, I locked 10 grand for a year, and this should pay the vast majority of my tax obligation, my outstanding tax obligation. Now, which means I have other cash that I lock for about a month, and I got free cash. I could take profits. And that's pretty cool. So I got some extra cash in the crypto space that has been generated over the last year. And obviously, I have like a $24,000 tax obligation for 2022. So if let's say I take 10 grand out, I'm going to bump my tax obligation, 2,500 bucks. And that's the way I think about the market. So I have free cash. I have my tax obligation already set aside in a form that's less than my current tax obligation, and it's going to earn interest. So by next year, uh, the my the principal will grow to be able to accommodate my current tax obligation. So that's how I manage cash positions, and to have this kind of yield, as you can see here, VEFXS, depending on how much you have, you can get up to a 2x multiplier on revenue. So right now, I don't have enough. I put an extra 5 grand in, which threw off my balance. So I have a 1.821 multiplier, but I also put time. So obviously a 1 month gives you another 1x on the multiplier, but the 1 year gives you 2x on the multiplier, 3.4874%. So this is nice. Like $60 a day. That's a come on. You guys have to keep it real. Like folks are like, I want to make a fortune and I want to get 10,000% yield and make $1 million, but you got to keep it real. How many folks historically have a savings account, 10, 20, 30 grand, and they get nothing. They get literally nothing, nothing, nothing. Meanwhile, $60 a day, $70 a day, $80 a day. You guys got to understand in the United States, that's like minimum wage. That's a job. So with a relatively modest savings account, 35 grand, I have an extra job. So the most important thing really when talking about the crypto space is keep it real. People are so greedy and distorted from reality and think it's some magic internet money when if you treat it like real protocols, you treat this stuff like it has the potential to be something meaningful as compared to legacy finance, which has absolutely nothing, offers you nothing, no opportunity whatsoever, negative real yields on everything. But if you treat these protocols like they're like with the respect they likely deserve, that's so meaningful. 60, 70, $80 a day. I respect the shit out of that because that's capital. That's a full-time salary for someone, a human being working their ass off 40 hours a week. Probably very depressed as well. I would be not so happy at that kind of compensation, but I'm able to do that because I've worked and I was able to accumulate this kind of capital here, 35 and change, and I have an entire salary that's equivalent to an entire human's work weekly productivity. This is about that's respect. I respect that so much. So, could you explain a little bit more about Olympic DAO and how it's stable, is not pegged with USD? How is it stable? It's not pegged with USD. Ding ding. Not that's not entirely the way I see it. OHM certainly not stable. It's hyperinflationary. But what's pertinent is SOM is a token. So you're able to, so when you convert OHM to SOM, you actually have an asset that's pretty much a receipt for your deposit. And that receipt is representative of the OHM locked value. And it's a collateralizable asset. So there's a couple of unique characteristics to what they did. And, I find them, what I see, um, the developer, the sentiment I get of the developers has a very fraxy overtone to them, which is what caught my eye. You guys know like the stuff I see in Adamant and Beefy Finance and DFYN and all that shit that we see with hyperinflationary yields doesn't really appeal to me. But when you start to see partnerships and integrations, you start to get a sense of the developer mentality and who they are. And man, Sam over at Frax and a lot, even the folks at Popsicle and Alchemist and clearly Scoopy at Alchemix and man, who was Elizabeth Warren yesterday in the banking hearing said, what was it, the invisible super brain programmers, and come on, isn't that awesome? Yeah, maybe it's because I'm a programmer that when she said that, I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what I want. I want super brain programmers to be able to build awesome things because that's the shadowy. She said the word shadowy super brain programmers or something. That's what I want. That's where I want to align myself with, and not corporations where they get the profits, but programmers where revenue and capital flow is a bit more transparent and represented by code that what you see here is the manifestation of code, and that code will have a predictable behavior unless there's a malfunction, but that's another story. But there's all the protocols that I interact with are mainstream, and the top, they're the cream of the crop, the cream at the top. I don't mess with the degeneracy. I never did. It's clearly expressed with my sentiment of Binance Smart Chain and my complete ignoring of it. Mark, sovereign. Yes, I like to think to myself as self-sovereign. Clearly, I operate within the confines of a sovereign country, but these are just freaking words that we spit out of our mouth, and a lot of it is mental state. What is your mental state? You know, I operate within the confines of a system, but I am also aware of that system. Man, the matrix is so relevant. Everything about the matrix, metaphorically, is so incredibly relevant to reality. Man, that storyline. So, if you really need a wake up call on how to reorient your perspective of things, just really watch The Matrix and just look at it from a metaphorical perspective. That storyline is crazy. Really is. Red pill the shit out of yourself. Aussie, moving to Portugal. Ooh, I love it. What a planet. I mean, I love those two countries. Beautiful. Mark, a truth of reality, a mutable law. Um, you know, those are big words. Truth, reality, immutable, and law. And they're very meaningful. And I think semantics are meaningful, uh, and and complicated and beautiful and elegant. And those are some really, aside from what you were referring to right there, those are really good words. Kind of hung up on the words, not necessarily what you were trying to express. We have a lot of ambiguity with regard to truthfulness right now in society, and clearly we have a distortion of reality where people don't even know what fucking reality they're working in. They literally just wake up and they operate with the confines of the defined system of control, immutable, and that's what we're dealing with the excitement in the crypto space. And whereas in a corporation or companies, so on and so forth, everything is mutable and it's completely untransparent. And I have my securities, and every once in a while I get the proxy votes, and I'm like it, it's like elected representatives, and it drives me nuts. So it's clearly not an immutable system. Whereas, like, every time I hear Uniswap v3 talk about how immutable it is, and I know the contracts are immutable, and I know that there's IPFS hosted portals. So that's so meaningful. That's so damn meaningful compared to anything we historically interacted with. Like those contracts of Uniswap, you can't. No one could do anything about that, no matter what. What are they going to block IP addresses to individual Ethereum nodes? There's no way to restrict access to those smart contracts. So in theory, you could interact with Uniswap directly with the smart contracts, but because of IPFS and unstoppable domains and other types of uncensorable hosting solutions, you can't stop interaction with these protocols. That's crazy. So that's unregulatable. That's crazy. So we're living through in real time unprecedented, unrestrictable, uncontrollable technology, emergent technology that's unrestrictable, uncontrollable, unregulatable. So profound and tantalizing. Rupert's in the house, always a pleasure. Aave is next for Ohm. Oh my God, I saw the proposal. If Ohm gets on Aave, that's cool. Well, S Ohm. So staked Ohm. So it's restricted supply. So the value of the protocol is in Ohm. So as people stake it, restricted supply, considering the hyperinflation, means it'll have less debasing effects, and being able to extract equity from from a locked position, that's really meaningful. That's like ST Ave. Why the heck is ST Ave not collateralizable? I mean, frankly, that's Ave's own staked asset. I'm surprised because a lot of Aave it's all governance driven. So why isn't there more staked assets proposed in their governance? Bear in mind, the curve is not a staked asset. You don't get a token. It's literally a deposit. Um, why isn't CDX CRV why isn't everything collateralizable where you can borrow cash against it? And that generates revenue for people that provide cash liquidity. And that revenue facilitates capital flow. And this goes into really how the US government measures velocity of money. M2 velocity is an example. So the more stable coins that are provided as liquidity and the more collateral that's used the more assets that are used as collateral to collateralize debt positions against, so extracting equity against that collateral, the more money creation that occurs in the terms of the historic commercial banking money creation process, double entry accounting considered. That's velocity of money. So these are the characteristics of a real financial system. Real, as in the legacy financial system. We're in the process of an emergent financial system that has all the characteristics of the historic financial system. If that's not mind-blowingly profound, I don't know what is. Adam, Bitcoin, The Matrix, my favorite film for the past 10 years. Man, the storyline, the metaphors are mind-blowing if you really dig in. Mike, that's why DeFi and blockchain is beautiful, transparent, so much potential to cut red tape. And that really annoys the shit out of old school thinking politicians because they think they are responsible for the people and they can help protect people. How about you educate people how to protect themselves and how to make good decisions and how to be rational and reasonable and decent human beings that care? How about you incentivize, like literally a big thing of the DeFi space is incentive systems. How about you incentivize your public, your constituents, politicians, to be considerate and kind and reasonable and clearly, you incentivize them how financially. You have the incentive systems involve compensation. But this is something for you to think about. Why don't you gamify the shit out of the U.S. government? Why don't you, take a page out of DeFi and think of something that's remotely innovative? Incentive systems. And tax breaks are not an incentive system. It's so annoying. Oh, we're going to take less of your money as an incentive. Yeah, okay, you're doing really well, politicians. If that's the best incentive system you could think of, oh my God, that's mind melting. A tax break is not an incentive. Adam, Pat, have you thought about what we're missing before we can use DAOs and the likes to govern ourselves? Why not? Well, what we need is the Oracle solutions that tie the software decision or the software consensus process into real world actions. So that's part of a technological hurdle. Um, that's about it. Otherwise, literally, it's just a vote, and the general public could vote, and all we need for voting is identity, and identity is literally a public-private key pair. And if people are worried about quantum computing, you just make a giant key. Use 10 million bits. Be a heck of a key. Come on, man. Have a key that takes a week to generate. That'd be crazy. So there's identity. I have a capacity to prove my identity using a YubiKey. That identity is associated with me in whatever public registrar of the U.S. government, and that's what I use to vote. So it's so simple that every single politician can be completely obliterated, and then the government will say, "But the general public can't do that. They won't be able to represent themselves." Well, that's pretty sad. That's a sad state for a society where people don't want to vote and don't want to contribute their ideas to make society a better place. That's a selfish and self indulging and consumerist society. And that's really tragic. Uh, Power with the people instead of power over the people. Yeah. Well, we'll see what happens, and we only know what happens in hindsight. Mike, right on. Yes. Justin, do you have any hesitation that the developers behind Olympus are anonymous? Um, Anonymous developers. I'm never early. How do I handle it? I'm never early and I'm never late. I don't touch anything that's new unless there's significant reason to do so, like Convex. Convex was intimately related to Curve devs, and the Curve devs are very public. You can find them on LinkedIn, so there's complete transparency there. And like very few projects I was in on early, like Ren, I was in pre-launch. I was buying running ChaosNet, and I had the Ren VM set up on ChaosNet. Um, but if I have any hesitation, I wait for it to launch, and I let other people take the risk. It's all about risk assessment. So I rather, unfortunately, let other people that have a higher risk tolerance take the risk prior to myself. Let a protocol prove itself, and then obviously I've managed my risk accordingly. That's my opinion about anonymous developers. I mean, come on, Banteg is the most famous anonymous developer of Yearn. And literally, if you look at the source code of the Yearn contracts, they're so elegantly structured. The syntax, the patterns, the organization, the hierarchy, their, their contracts, the way they were built, they're beautiful. The code's beautiful. Sup, Posh. Noah, which D app you think right now has too much network effect to ever lose dominance? Prav, Curve, Aave, Unis. Yeah, the majors. The majors aren't going anywhere. They have network effect through the roof. Curve, Uniswap, Bancor's been around since 2017. Aave, Sushi. Sushi's entrenched. They're FTX at this point. Ren's entrenched. They have critical mass. They obliterated all the other um, extra chain, extra chain meaning outside of chain, cross chain solutions like Polygon. You're using their smart contract as the intermediary, as the custodian. But Ren, you could also go to Polygon using Ren. You extract BTC and then you mint the Ren BTC on Polygon. So it's a bridge in that regard, but it's an outside of a chain custodian that facilitates the cross chain transaction. Um, so I still think that's a heck of a technology. It's not the most lucrative position, so there's a bunch of opportunity costs associated with Ren VMs. But that's something that I have a speculative opinion that will be systemic infrastructure in the future. So, while I always talk about risk minimization, which is why I have cash positions and I have concentration, which is my convex position, and I do get tempted, depending on the macroeconomic climate. I mean, China's literally shitting the bed. If you guys haven't seen, the Chinese markets are literally like down 10%. They're shitting themselves. It's little, you have to hesitate a minute. But bear in mind, I'll talk macro for just 2 minutes, and then I'm going to wrap things up. This has been a long one. I got work to do. But some good commentary from Colorado Travis Kimmel, and Stephen Van Meter, always about their penchant for deflationary implosions. And was it Julius from, I forget his last name, but Raoul's friend. Um, yeah, if you want to, so Travis and Stephen talk about deflation. Everything's QE is deflationary. Sure, I appreciate that. I understand that. But ultimately, you have to time the market. If you want to capitalize on a deflationary event, you got to time the top, which is exactly the same as buying the bottom. I have no interest in doing either. And I wrote a tweet about that in response to Stephen. I'm like, that's not a way to live. Sitting in front of a computer screen trying to find the tops and the bottoms using technical analysis. No. I want revenue streams, and I find that much more interesting, and that's why the opportunity in the DeFi space are so meaningful to me. Um, And what I know is the interventionists will engage. And look, in March of 2020, it took what, 3 months for warp speed ahead, and they came up with all their four-letter acronyms at the Fed and whipped the markets up into a frenzy right quick to the point where it was a V-shaped recovery. Oh, they were right. They sure as hell got that right. If we looked at the S&P, which I'm not going to pull up in the moment. So maybe next time it's only a week. They're getting good at interventionism. So I have my deflation protection. I keep a lot of liquidity in T-bills, and I do have 10 years. But one thing folks often say there's only a couple things that are guaranteed in life: death and taxes. There's a lot of guarantees. It is guaranteed that the Federal Reserve will engage in interventionism. It's guaranteed at this point. Because and it's guaranteed for a couple of good reasons. There'll be a humanitarian crisis if the S&P 500, if Nasdaq or the Dow Jones collapses a good 25%. There'll be a heck of a humanitarian crisis, and frankly, you could see some pension funds explode, depending on their leverage and what they're exposed to. And then we have a humanitarian crisis in the retirement population. And at this point, the system is so leveraged to the tits. That's a line out of The Big Short. Woo! That system could completely unravel, and I don't think the system completely unravel to the degree where intervention doesn't have an effect or a desired effect. So they could that's the power that I think they have. They could literally, and obviously this is where they could cause hyperinflation, and over the next couple of years we could seriously destroy the value of the currency. But that's a process. It all takes time. When people say a collapse or the dollar fails, it doesn't happen in an event. It's not like, oh, boom, the dollar just failed now, right now. All this shit is like astronomical events. It takes time to play out. These are large systems. So, don't think things happen instantaneously. A good reason I have the T-bills and the bonds is that if there's a deflationary event, those T-bills and bonds turn into risk assets. In March of 2020, 10 years went 78%, up to 78% in price in 3 weeks. Food for thought. Do you think investing? You've had 2 more questions. I'm going to wrap it up. Do you think investing in layer 2 is better long term than layer 1? I don't own any Matic and I hold barely any Ethereum. Food for thought. Thoughts on Handshake? I don't know what it is, my friend. We got old folks living on $1,500 a month fixed income for the last decade or so of their life. That's not. Yeah, but bear in mind that's like an annuity, and where are they getting their revenue? I guess that's from a social system, Social Security, and taxes, and pay that. And Social Security has an insolvency date, and maybe if there's a significant enough of a deflationary impulse, they have to pilfer more from Social Security to fix the stability of the overall financial system, and then Social Security gets jeopardized, and whatever. There's a whole hot mess in legacy finance, which is exactly why I'm going to end the stream on the fact that we need investor protections in the crypto space from legacy finance and its destructive tendencies. It's self-destructive. It's literally like a suicidal system. The system is intent on destroying itself, and we need protection. If any politician ever watches me, help. We need protections in the crypto space to prevent the legacy system, the securities markets, the treasury and the bond markets, and the debt markets and the money markets from negatively affecting this new nascent system. So stop thinking that the crypto space could harm the legacy financial system, and start thinking how the legacy financial system could fuck up something that's good, new, innovative, exciting, progressive, and whatever fancy acronym you want to think of. So Wednesday, July 28, 12:27 p.m. As always, I thank everyone for joining me. Discord's still good. Love talking to you guys. Always a pleasure. Tell everyone to subscribe to the stream, and I wish everyone a wonderful day. I will see you tomorrow. Peace.